Good morning and welcome to Guided Meditations and More. I'm your host, Ade Richardson, and Guided Meditations and More podcast is a show that I started back in June of 2020. The Guided Meditations and More page was started in March when COVID hit here in New York, and I was looking for to provide a place where people can get support with the pandemic. So I provided guided meditations, different spiritual teachings and tools that people could use to deal with the stress and difficult emotions that many people were dealing with during that time. Now that was back in March in 2020. So then in June, I decided to have guests come and join me and to provide their knowledge and experience on a variety of topics. So I've had educators, spiritual teachers, nutritionists, entrepreneurs, various types of people on a variety of topics. So today's topic is From India to the Caribbean, the East Indian diaspora in the West Indies. And I have the great honor and pleasure to have with us today Mr. Lenroy Thomas. Hi, Lenroy.
Hi, thank you for being on your show, for inviting me.
So it's Lenroy is in Turkey, is that correct?
Yes, I live in Turkey.
Okay, what time is it there?
Now it's 3:08 p.m.
Okay.
It's ideal time here.
Yeah. So it's about 8
7 hours of New York time.
Okay. Okay. So let's get right into it. I thought I'd begin perhaps by reading your bio. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. Lenroy Thomas, born in St. Vincent of the Grenadines, resides in Turkey. Co-founder of SVG Indian Heritage Foundation, SVGIHF's Facebook group and website administrator, researched records at the National Archives, UK, attended National Institute for Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises, MA Export Marketing Management, Brunel University, former marketing manager, accountant and project appraisal officer, teaches English as a foreign language online. So I thought we'd begin at the beginning. We have so much to cover. You know, this is such a large topic with very complex, and there's so many areas we can go into. So we're not going to have enough time to go into all of it. But I thought we would start at the beginning. So what got you interested in the learning about the indo-carribean history?
Well, growing up in St. Vincent in the Caribbean, obviously we are different. We have a history. The population there is mostly African descent. So naturally you would want to find out why you're different. Yeah. And when I was very young, my mother had a shop, and one of her uncle, Vincent, used to be there helping out in the shop. So I got interested in asking about my family, my ancestors, my great uncles, and so on. And I remember taking a piece of brown paper. In those days, we used to wrap these things in the shop in brown paper. And I took a piece of that brown paper and I started to write down the notes, who was my great-great-grandparents and different family connections and so on. So it started there, you basically want to find out who your family are and so on. And sometime later, I went to England and I thought that I had some time. I was ill sometime there. And I thought, this is a good time I carried that paper, actually, I had it all along, and I typed it up. And, from there, I noticed one thing in England, that the children there were a bit different than the children in St. Vincent, the Indians. I noticed a bit of difference. I guess it's more of your generation, those who went away from St. Vincent when they were young. And I wondered about their identity. So that issue about identity came up into my mind. And that is one of the things that spurred me on to do a bit more research into our roots.
So just to be clear on that, you were in England and you were meeting kids about that would be in my generation that came over from St. Vincent, and you noticed that their behavior or their ideals and just the way that they were was different from who? In your generation or?
Yeah, well, there was a time when I was working in an office, and I was the one of the accountants there, and then in the evening, some people came to work, and I thought, I'm in St. Vincent, when I was in St. Vincent, and in terms of education, we were very motivated to get an education. And I thought, why our people in England not as motivated as we are in St. Vincent to get an education? Right, so that was one aspect. And then I also noticed that the Indians from India who were living in England, they had a different outlook of life also. So those are some of the things that motivated me to find out a bit more about our roots.
Ah, okay. So that generation that you met that came over from St. Vincent to England, the generation that's like in my generation, you noticed that they weren't very motivated towards education the way that your generation was, and you noticed that the Indians there that were from India, would you say that they seemed more motivated towards education? Was that one of the differences?
Yeah, they were highly motivated, yeah. The Indians from England at that time, they were actually at the time scoring the second highest grades in England after the Chinese, in England, at that time, But there are differences in their children from St. Vincent who are living in England and those who are born there. There are different levels of motivation also. But I thought that also in St. Vincent there are differences between the villages and the background of the people and the religion and all that things. There are a lot of factors that motivate people to do different things. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
It's a melee of different things.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot of complexity and nuance to it, but in either case, it kind of it sparked the interest in this question of identity for you. It seems, and so did that influence you and motivate you to dive deeper into that research?
Yeah, I did a bit of research, not very, very deep as to say going to academic research and so on. What my own research like anybody would do. So I went to Kew Gardens, and when I went back to St. Vincent, I also looked at the information at the National Archives. At that time, the only thing that was available in St. Vincent was the Indian Register of Indians. Of the Indians who came to St. Vincent, and there was also an article at the National Archives from the Vincentian written by a cousin of ours, Dr. Lenroy Thomas. Yeah, so he did a lot of research before, so I would say he's the most capable person in terms of the history of St. Vincent, the Indians in St. Vincent, who came to St. Vincent. Yeah. So I did some research there, and then I went back to England, and one time I remember at church they were having a program about your roots, and they were asking. We have members from different places, So they were doing a program about St. Vincent, the people from St. Vincent. And there's a lady who they asked to talk about the African descent. For some reason, they chose me to talk about Indian descent, and another talk about the Portuguese. Yeah. So that also stimulated me to do a bit more. Yes. I'm not hearing you. Your volume is gone.
Okay. So yeah, I put it on mute when I'm not talking. So just wanted to mention those that are watching, if you have any questions for Mr. Thomas, you know, feel free to send them in. So I thought we can also go into maybe give a little encapsulated or maybe not so encapsulated history of that, you know, that the history of our ancestors coming from India to the Caribbean. So let's begin with, you know, one of the things I was curious about is, were they taken by force? Why did they come? You know,
Right. Okay. So I noticed in your introduction, you had, for this program, you had mentioned displacement. And so it was a displacement there. And you also mentioned Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs and so on. In India, what has happened in 100 years before is that the British had taken over India, you know, in the 1750s, around there. So they were ruling India for some time, gradually taking over different cities and so on. And during that time, many things happened. Just before our batch of Indians came to St. Vincent in 1857, around there, 58, you would have thought of the Indian Mutiny. So that the Indians were dissatisfied with what was happening. The British were basically disrupting the whole economy. They were moving away from textile into agriculture and things like that. But also at that time, when they had that mutiny, and a lot of English people were killed, the British came back and killed a lot of the Indians, you know. So there was disruption at the time. So one of the big things that happened also in the 1860s is that there was a famine. There were several famines from 1861, 1866, 67, 1874, right up. And that is the period when the Indians came to St. Vincent. The Indians came to St. Vincent between 1861 and 1880 on 8 ships. And so that, I think, is the leading motivation for them to want to go away. The economic condition was devastated by the famines and the terrible famines in India. There was a lot of starvation. In a place called Orissa, I understand that there were about 1 million people who died from this famine. And it would have been a natural disaster, causes from natural, but also because of the disruption of the economy and the way of life by the British. So during that time when the people were starving, for example, they could have stopped exporting rice to the UK, but they were still exporting rice to the UK, and the people in India were suffering. They could have gotten rice and other food from different places, but they apparently one of the philosophy was to just let nature take its toll, and it shouldn't disrupt nature by doing these things. So, but later they accepted to bring rice and different stuff from other countries. So what was happening there was terrible. You know? The one, because of the war before, the mutiny, and there was a lot of disruption. So people who were well-to-do were displaced. They became poor. You know, the people who were middle class, for example, they also suffered, became poor. There was starvation, so people wanted to move out from India, to improve the economic situation. I have, if you don't mind, I could share something on the screen here. Let me see. And a picture. There's a picture to okay. Okay, I could show you a picture of to make it more.
Okay.
There's an article by Dinah Passer on the BBC that that talks about that. Yeah. Anyway, so so that was the motivation in coming and moving out from India, you know, and India also ruled the Caribbean, you know, territories in the Caribbean. So it had started since the end of slavery in 1834, 38, you know.
Yeah.
And they wanted, because the Africans refused to work for the low wages, they tried to bring in laborers from overseas. So they started in the Census for the Portuguese about 1845. And then in 1861, they got to bring the Indians. It was not necessarily a shortage of labor, but it was because they wanted to not pay the Africans the wages they were demanding. Right? So the Indians came in, they accepted these wages and so on, and started to work in the plantation. So the first boat that came to St. Vincent, first ship that came was in 1861. June 1st or 2nd, there are two records of this. I noticed there was a place where it was recorded as June 2nd and June 1st. But we adopted June 1st as the date of Indian arrival.
Okay. So would you say that the did the East Indians come into the Caribbean, was it partly a result because of the abolition of slavery?
Right.
Okay.
Definitely.
And so just on that trip, what was that trip like on the journey? Did Indians get sick, or were there diseases? What was the conditions like?
Well, I read one article, fact by a guy, Tinker. He said that there were about 17% of the Indians who died. I'm not sure if that is true, but in the case of St. Vincent, I saw figures, ranging from about 2,400 and some people that went to St. Vincent. There were about under 56, I saw a figure 56 that died on board. So the conditions were very bad. When they left India, well, there are different opinions on that, because I just saw someone present a paper who was saying that the British fed the Indians very well while they were being transported to the Caribbean. But being that made people died, on the ship. So that is true that the conditions were not very good. They were crowded together, how many on a boat? 400 and some on these small ships, 200 and some, 300 and some, So it was kind of depressing on those boats. And they had to journey for 3 months on average, going around the tip of Africa and then coming up to the Caribbean. So that was a long time. 1 or 2 boats, I think one boat stopped in St. Helena. And there is an account of one stopping somewhere in Africa. I'm not sure about that one, but that's a story that was passed on by someone.
Yeah, and so you say that so this was during the time where there was a great famine in India. People were starving. It seems like from what I understand, they were given rice. There wasn't enough rice, and I'm assuming that the higher, the wealthy people were kind of monopolizing the situation and benefited from this, while the lower caste of Indians were starving. Is that?
Well, that could be true, but remember there was displacement in terms of classes at the time of the British rule.
Yeah.
So they would have people who were, as I said before, who were probably high high incomes, economic wealth, they were displaced also there before coming. So
Okay.
remember, this also happened just before the mutiny, 1857, 58, and
Mhm.
before she came to Simmons, 1861, 3 years after. Yeah.
So
So
were
it's
they
not everybody was poor. I mean, because of the situation there. Yeah. So.
and what were they promised? What was the story like? How were they convinced to come over to the Caribbean?
Right. Well, they were promised a wage, a good job on the contract of 5 years to work in St. Vincent, and then at the end of that contract, they go back to India, serving their contract. They were promised housing and the maintenance of those houses, while they're there, and security, the things like that.
So they, a lot of people. It sounds like a fair amount of people didn't make it over. I think you said specifically in St. Vincent, it was about 56 people that died on that trip.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not sure about the figure that in particular, but about 50 something. The total amount is 24,075, 74, around that. There's some figures that, but it's, let's say 4,500 people, roughly.
and when they came here, the Caribbean, specifically St. Vincent, were they allowed to keep their culture, their religion, and things of this nature? And was that different in St. Vincent than it was in, let's say, Trinidad or Guyana and other
Mm.
places in the Caribbean?
Right, so when they came, they were basically allowed to keep their culture in most of the territories in Trinidad and Guyana and so on. But in these smaller islands, there was more pressure on the Indians to convert to Christianity. In the case of St. Vincent, there was a lot of pressure there. So they would do things. I've heard stories of the Indians in St. Vincent. Someone said that you had to adopt an English name to get into the private schools. I'm not too sure, but I haven't seen that recorded. But they, but there was some sort of pressure there to convert to Christianity in the earlier days. I'm talking here about from the time it came from 1861 to about the 1900, to about 1900 or so. But after, at the end of that time, people were joining voluntarily. You know, in the case of my grandfather, for example, this is about 1930 thereabouts, and also Mr. Chaba Woods in Richland Park. Well, I have his date. His date was 1831 when he joined Adventist. My grandfather would have joined around that time also, 1820, late 1820s, or sorry, 1920s. Did I say 18 just now? I'm talking about late 1920s, 1930s. So yeah, that's the correction. So around 1930s, people were voluntarily joining religion. Even before that, they were. My grandfather. I remember the story told by my father that in Richland Park, most of the Indians were Hindu or no religion. They came from India. They didn't adhere to or keep their religion. And my grandfather decided to join the Seventh-day Adventists. There were missionaries from Trinidad, Indian missionaries, by the way, who came up. But I guess that was one of the strategies to get to the Indians. And came up to St. Vincent. And Chamba Woods and my grandfather, they were the pioneers of the Adventist Church in Richland Park. And then you had Joseph Moore, who was very influential and who had a lot of children in Richland Park. He later joined, and all his children and a lot of other Indians joined the Richmond Pact. So it was voluntarily done. At the beginning, there was some pressure, yeah, but I haven't seen records of specific pressure put on them, no other than the stories that I've heard, that there was some kind of pressure put on them, earlier. But apparently in the other territories like Guyana and Trinidad, there wasn't any pressure to join a Christian religion. Remember also that in India there is about 30-something, over 30 million people who are Christians, and in the diaspora of India, it's probably about that figure, about 25 million, sorry. So there's Christianity in India, there's Christianity in the Caribbean. Yeah, but in St. Vincent, to summarize, it's basically the small population, they would have been influenced easier, and and they would join other religion based on their reasoning, to move on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to get more into that, but I want to back up just for a moment. So, and I want to talk a little bit more about the conditions in which they were treated when they were here working as indentured laborers. What did they do? What were their jobs like, and what was the conditions like?
Right. So they were basically imported to work on the plantations, the sugarcane plantations, and to grow the cane, process the cane, which was to be shipped to England. So they worked on that those plantations and estates in St. Vincent during the time. But in 1862, the sugar, during the 1860s, 17, there was ups and downs in the sugar industry. The prices fluctuated. And I think the planters wanted to pass this loss on to the Indians. So it became more competitive. There was also during that time the invention of beet sugar. A German guy invented beet sugar, and that was getting more popular in Europe. So the need for sugarcane was lessening. They started to produce more cane also in America and in Cuba and those places. So with more volume, the prices usually go down. So St. Vincent, the price of sugar became less competitive. The estate suffered. So they tried to pass that pressure on to the Indians to get them to produce more with less. And there were even cases where it was alleged that they were paid less wages than they were contracted for. So they protested against these kind of things, And some allowances, things that they were supposed to get while they were on the estate, those were cut when this happened. So the Indians were quite dissatisfied. They were restricted also in terms of movement. They were not allowed to go out from the estate or within 2 miles of the estate. So communication was affected. There was disaffection basically there. In some cases, when the sugar price was low and the business on the estate was not very good, when the new shipment came in, some of them had to stay at the depot before assigned to the estate for some time. Even during that time, they suffered. So later on, a lot of them moved to Trinidad and migrated to other places because of that. Half of them, about half of 2,400, about 1,100 got to go back to India after their contracts were finished. But most of them stayed in St. Vincent and then migrated to other places. A lot of Indians died also because of diseases. There was a lot of disease like Tobo and Yaz and dysentery. I understand in 1892, maybe about 200 died. someone estimated that, and in 1898, after the hurricane, another 100 probably died. So that, and all the hurricane, the volcanic eruption of 1902 also took a lot of time, because many of them were living at the foothills of the volcano on the windward side of the island, and on estates like Lot 14, Roberta, Orange Hill Estates. My great, how many greats? My ancestors used to live, the Thomases from Richmond Park, their ancestors used to live up there at Lot 14, and those of the Moes also, Mary Moe, her parents used to live there. I think your ancestors also probably have some connection there.
Yeah.
So that took about maybe over 500 Indians, because a lot of them were living there. So by 1911, I saw in a presentation by Dr. Adrian Fraser celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Indians to St. Vincent. He said that the 1911 census had 376 Indians. So of the 12 or 1300 who should remain, maybe half of them died because of diseases and the eruption. And a lot of them also migrated to Trinidad after the contracts were finished and other places. At the turn of the century, some people would have started to migrate also to Aruba and Curacao to get work. And America, so in the 1930s, people were starting to go to America.
Yeah, and we're really getting a picture of one of the things I want to focus on a little bit later in this discussion is the need for belonging and how we develop, how important our identity is, to that as well. But I want to go back. I just want to touch on one thing that you brought up when the Indians were kind of pushed to work harder for less money because the price of sugarcane was going down. How did they protest that? In which ways did they resist that?
Yeah, well, they tried to resist, and they tried to they make complaints to the people around them, the overseers and so on. But they were stopped. The British had their things set up in such a way that they were not able to make their complaints properly to the magistrates or to go to Kingstown because they were not allowed to 2 miles out of the estates. So they tried, and also the plantation owners had their friends who were the magistrates. Remember, they were from the same class. So they worked everything against the Indians. So the Indians also were treated very badly because the plantation owners and the overseers, they had this attitude that they were slaves. And remember, slavery had just finished, and they used to treat the Africans, very badly. So they thought, they could do the same thing with the Indians, and they did that to a certain extent. So it was another form of slavery in the estate. Because these people came from India, they were in a situation blackmailed into coming there, and they could not have gone back. And they would have worked, the overseers and the administrators would do things in such a way to make them feel guilty if they do anything to protesting. So we had a protest of some Indians. Dr. Untitled Thomas talked about that. He's about the 7 Indians who eventually marched from Argyle and Calder into Kingstown in 1882, I think, October 7th. That's why we have that as Heritage Day, Indian Heritage Day of St. Vincent. They marched to Kingstown and defined the rules of the 2-mile limit from the estate. And there were 7 of the main leaders. They were picked up by the authorities and they were charged for leaving the estate, but later on, this news got to those in high positions. What they were really, that group, I think, they were protesting against, particularly of their return passage to India. So that group, maybe I come from the Countess of Ripon, the boat that went to St. Vincent in 1866. So they were the estate owners always there, so doing things to make it difficult for them to go back. So that they would charge them, bring up these allegations that they broke this rule or broke this rule, make it very difficult for them. So, when it's very difficult and you can't get, your needs satisfied, you do things so, you break the law. And the laws, they would be charged heavy penalties. And some of these penalties would prevent them from getting accepted fulfilling terms to return to India. So all of these things compounded the situation. And so that's why it was a desperate situation now to march into Kingston and even break the law further. Yeah, but it was successful in the end in that the governor, those who were higher up in authority, heard about this case. The governor was in St. Lucia, and they released those 7 guys, and then they decided to send all of the Indians who were not working back to India. Those who were qualified. So that's when a lot of them went back to India in the 1980s. Sorry, 1880s. Some of them will started to go back since 1875, around there, but the majority was scrambling to go back in the 1880s. Yeah.
And were they promised tickets to go back to India at some point? And why did most people take that offer, or did some people decide to? Obviously, people decided to stay.
Yes, so some people decided to stay. Obviously, in the records, I saw about 410 notes in the Indian register where these 410 accepted to take a £10 in lieu of going back to India. So instead of going back to India, although the passage at the time was about £20, but when they came, it was about £10. I mean, there's a lot of money at the time. But they took the £10 and they stayed in St. Vincent. That money was a lot, as I said, and so I think my ramble up. If he is the same person we see in the book, and I think it's that person in the register, he took the £10 bounty, and I guess like the other Indians, they would have tried to invest that in lands. Remember, at the end of this period, by the 1880s, the sugarcane industry was 1890s was basically decimated because of the competition outside. So the British planters, they wanted to go back to England, so they were selling out lands, and there was they had different schemes to give lands on terms to the residents of St. Vincent.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
So and I want to. I'm trying to paint a picture here, kind of setting up to explore this question of identity that I think is important, to this history, and at least for me, One question I had though was, when we talk about the fact that some people stayed, I wonder, did they have family? Like, did they have wives or kids back in India, and were they planning not to go back to see them, or was there a plan to try to get them to come to the Caribbean?
Yeah, in the case of St. Vincent, I haven't seen records in that regard that they were communicated. In the case of Trinidad, Indians were coming until 1917, so they had contact with India, they were writing their families, they were sending back remittances to India and so on. So they were closer relationships, I think, in Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad. In sense, I haven't seen those records, but maybe they were sending back remittances. But it seems as though those who stayed, they didn't communicate with those in India. If they had family, they would have had family over there. So that's why we're trying to link up now. Okay, we're trying to link up to find some of these families. We are doing some detective work to use whatever records we have to try to link up with them.
Yeah.
So we lost the connection, basically. But I must say, in regards to identity and displacement and things like that, it is really the first generation who feel the shock. So those who came from India to St. Vincent, they would have missed India. You know, some of them may not have wanted to go back because life would have been better in St. Vincent from what they left in the famine. The famines were there at that time. You know, so some would have deliberately stayed. Some of them may have wanted to go back and they were not able to because of the restrictions and the things that the British did in St. Vincent to prevent them from going back. It seems as though many of them, like in the case of Trinidad, stayed in St. Vincent and they made a family, made a life, and so on. But unfortunately, they haven't. We do not have any record of them communicating and keeping that going. So it's only at the turn of the 21st century, a few of us, those who are overseas from America and Canada, are able to go to India and try to sort. I don't think anyone has from St. Vincent found their relative in India yet. I'm working on that right now with Julian Backus and some others.
Yeah.
We're trying to make some connection. But Trinidad is a genealogist. You may have heard Shamsun Dean. He has made connection, helped people to make connection. For example, the former Prime Minister of Trinidad, Basil Pandey, connected with his family in India.
Yeah.
But for St. Vincent, we're working on that.
Yeah, and that's something I've always been fascinated about. And if we do have, I assume that there must be connections there. What is your opinion on that? Do you think that there is connections in India, and we just haven't? I'd imagine it'd be very difficult to find, depending on the records. How good are the records in St. Vincent? How good are the records in India? Is there access to? What is the process for you like in doing the research and finding these records?
Right. So there's some records. In case of St. Vincent, we have the only records we already have are the register of Indians. That's a list of the manifest, the passengers who were on the ship. And we have copies of those and communication from St. Vincent to England where the British were ruling. Those are recorded in the gazettes. There's a lot of research that could be done there to see what is there, actually. I haven't gone through all of them. My main search in the gazettes were already to get the list of the ships. Because what has happened is that the list in St. Vincent, there's a gentleman from St. Lucia, he's living in California now, Mr. Ade Richardson. He made a spreadsheet of all the information in the ship list, basically identifying the name of the person, the age, the passenger, the height, the father's name, the address in India, and some other notes about if they had a mole or a scar, identifying mark, so on. And so we've been working with that. I've been in touch with Chelly, and we are expanding that. So there was a lot of information missing. And there's still a lot of information missing, but we use some of the gazettes in England to put in a few of the, some of the missing information. But a lot of the addresses in India are still missing. The gazettes do not have the addresses in India. The Indian Register, it has addresses for about 5 of the boats. 3 of them do not have addresses, like the Lightning, the Countess of Ripon, and another one. And so that's one of the big problems. Do they have records in India? I have written about 12 years ago. and to the embassy. And recently, the foundation in Synergy Indian Heritage Foundation, we had some, our Prime Minister visited India recently. So we made contact with the offices and we wrote to them. So we're hoping that we will get that information from India, because they should have records in India also with the same information. We want to get that to put in the addresses that are missing. And now, if you get the address in India, you will need to go to India and search for your family. But before you go to India, you need to do a lot of research. Shamsuddin, in one of the programs to look at on ICCC, the Indo-Carribean Culture Center, the Zoom program, went through that process, what we need to do. Basically, so before you go there, you need to send the address maybe to a representative over there, maybe the district magistrate of the area, because they're in charge of the records, and you need to get somebody in St. Vincent, probably from the archives, to authorize, to sign something to say that you're searching for this person, or somebody at the embassy, somebody in a position of authority. Because if you just go there, they want to call you, and this records in India that you have to search, they're legal documents. So you have land, one of the main ones you have to search is the land records. So this is 160 years ago. This journal is 166 scholarship came to St. Vincent. So you wouldn't find, for example, if you're looking for Rambulak, the guy who came to St. Vincent, you wouldn't find no one would know him, in this generation. So his father, we have his father name, for example, that is in the register. Now the father-son combination is the key. So you would have to look back to about 1868. He came to St. Vincent in 1866. So we'd have to look around that time, 1860, 1880, around that time, to see if his father had any land recorded. His father's name is Jokho, Jokho. So if you could find his name in that record, or if you could find his name on the voters list, because he started elections in the 1850s, I think. And in India, they have election rolls with the voters list. Or even on the death certificates that were started in 1890s. But the father's name would be there going back on who died. So if you can find that name in one of those records, Jokho, then they have to search forward now to who got the land after and so on, or who are the children after and so on, come up to our generation up to the current time. So probably the person with the land is probably a descendant. Probably because they could find that way, or should you read the death records and the voters list. But you see the amount of work you need to do in India.
Yeah.
Those records says a lot, so it's probably better to get an expert and someone who has been doing it already in India to do it.
Yeah, and I wonder. Also, I wonder if the names. Some of the names are very common. How do we? It seems like in some ways I find a needle in a, because I've Googled some of these names before, and it's just
yes, you can. Yeah, so many. It's one of the big problems. So we have a good example here with Rambulak that we're using. When the British recorded the name, or the clerks on the boat, or who were working to do the manifest or updating the documents, it seems as though they wrote them as the song. So Rambulak, there is not a name in India traditionally Rambulak. It's Rambaluck that is written in the records. But it could have been Ram and an Indian name, Balak, B-A-L-A-K. It could have been Rambulak, so we were in that field. So some of the names would have been spelled wrong. Even the handwriting. Ade Richardson of St. Louis would transfer these things to the ship records. have to try to understand. And I did some of it also that he left off when I got the records from Anglo. And so to compare those now with what he wrote. So the handwriting also is a little problem, not a major problem, but that is also an issue. But the names are different. Even the names of the places also, some of the spellings have changed. The addresses, spellings would have changed. Also, the area might have been taken over by a big city. A small village or district would have been taken over, so that that name disappeared. Or it might have been separated. In the case of Rambalak, his address was written as Banaris, that is Varanasi now, but Varanasi, and the district Chandali, we think it's Chandali. But that district Chandali is now separated from Varanasi. So there's a lot of changes in regards to the map also, the geography. And even some of the names may not exist now. Some of the villages might have been combined and given different names and things like that. So you have to research the old maps. So that's another major issue.
Yeah. So so it sounds like a lot of work to track this down, and I appreciate all the work that you do to try to piece this puzzle together of our ancestral history, and which is a big piece in why we are the way that we are. You know, it's I think all of these things have an influence. And I'm going to ask a question by one of our viewers. Let's see, Celia Latham asked, the English had a big influence on our ancestors. What are the influence that still exist in the culture of Indians today?
Yeah, well, one of the main one there would be the religion. You know, the Hindus. In the case of St. Vincent, mainly the Hindus, or language. They're using English language. I mean, my language in there is a bit different now too, because I'm keeping to my conception pronunciation and things like that. They still, and you have been in America for some time. Well, were you born in America? Right.
Yes.
So your mom would have a different feelings towards St. Vincent, even than you, because she has a lot more stronger connection with St. Vincent. So the language would have changed, the religion, different. In St. Vincent, we lost a lot of our culture, the Indian culture, so the celebrations, the Hindu celebrations, because we chose Christianity rather than Hinduism. We throw away traditions also of Hinduism. Although some of the beliefs are the same, Christianity and Hinduism. So yes, those are some of the things that we maintain anyway. The food. So I think the strongest thing that we maintain is the in terms of our culture is the curry, the food.
Okay. I'm happy about that one.
Yeah. So that now has impacted the whole population of St. Vincent. So those of African descent and Portuguese descent, and even the British who are in St. Vincent, who stayed in St. Vincent, they also eat curry, they like their curry dal and curry roti and things like that. So we have made an impact in St. Vincent. So we took some of the Creole, and they also took some of the Indian. So it's an amalgamation of different cultures. So our accent also is from that.
Yeah.
We have the Indian. It depends on which one was stronger. But most of the Indians to St. Vincent, the 7 last ships, they came from the north of India, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. The first ship came from Chennai, Madras. So it depends on where you came from in India. That will affect your accent. And also the British influence, and which British? They were the Scottish and the Welsh. For example, my name is Thomas. It was influenced probably by the Welsh. The Welsh is Thomas is a very popular name there. So I guess we influence each other, so that now we have an amalgamation of cultures in St. Vincent, you know.
So would you say that the Indians that came over and took on this this new religion, Christianity, where they may have been Hindu before, or and took on English names, why do you think they were willing to assimilate to this this new culture and kind of shed their own culture? Do you think there was a sense of wanting to sort of fit in, or was there some pressure there? Was there maybe a combination of all these things?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned that, yeah, before. So there was some pressure, obviously, and there's a big pressure. I live in a different culture now than St. Vincent and America. I live in a Muslim country, yeah, and I see it all the time. For a Muslim here to convert to Christianity, it's very difficult because there's a lot of societal pressure, similar to what you have peer pressure in terms of youth. People also have this pressure around them. So it's not a matter of reasoning things out. It's a matter of what society accepts and going with the norms and values of society. So in India, for example, you're born a Hindu, you grow up a Hindu, you do not question anything, you just go through the rituals and the ceremonies of that religion and continue with your Buddhist or whatever. It's normal like that, yeah. But I think St. Vincent gave the Indians a space, right, to think about religion. In Trinidad and in St. Vincent also, people would have gone along with the crowd, as I say. But I remember my father talking about his father, Charlie Thomas, and the debates they used to have with each other. He used to have a lot of debates with Joseph Bacchus, and they were traditionally Hindus. We had a few Muslims in St. Vincent also, and some Christian, about 4 Christians identified from the list. But generally they were Hindus. But when you're in a different environment, you have the space to reason without the pressure of society and the pressure of doing something automatically because others are doing it. So they reasoned, and I read an interview with Mr. James Chowell Woods also, where he listened to and read a book from some colporteurs, the missionaries from Trinidad, The Great Controversy, and he made his mind up on his own to join the Seventh-day Adventists. Although he and my grandfather, they left and joined another, they formed another church, the Church of God and Seventh-day. So I think that is one of the things that we have to be aware of, that in a traditional society, you tend to follow the mainstream thought. And you don't even think about it, you don't question it. But St. Vincent gave the Indians a space to think about religion. Okay, what about Hinduism? Is it okay? Is it, what are the benefits and shortcomings? Are we keeping a lot of rituals and so on that is not necessarily our beliefs? So in Hinduism, in Islam, in Christianity too, a lot of Christians in St. Vincent, they will go to church. I think that is one of the differences between Adventists also and the other Christian religion. Some of the other Christian religion is that Seventh-day Adventists they study a bit more than the traditional Catholic. So the Catholic could just go to church and listen to the priest and so on. So I'm talking about that kind of thing in St. Vincent. They reason a bit more. So yeah, of course there's societal pressure, and but I think in the case in St. Vincent it was voluntary. They were convinced. My great grandfather was convinced that he was convicted. That's the word they use.
Yeah.
They're trying, so it's reason and logic and seeing what they think is, the best way.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that you're making is, um, you know, I can I can paint a picture of, okay, there are these people that were displaced, taken over from India and made to take on this new culture. And maybe in some ways that's true, but I don't want to miss the piece of what are some of the positive parts that came out of this, because the Indo-Caribbean people in St. Vincent are beautiful people, strong. There's so many great qualities, compassionate. You know, whenever I go to a relative's house, they're offering food with a smile, and there's a sort of uniqueness that came from this whole story of being in from taken from India, and now the story of perseverance, of hard work, of determination, of making of resilience. You know, making a life for yourself in this new land, and that sprouted something that is unique. And it can't really, you know, sometimes, you know, we can get into this thing of comparing, well, Indian people to Indo-Caribbean people, and but there, in some ways, there is this new identity, and part of this discussion is about that. So, what would you say the typical Indo-Caribbean person from St. Vincent, where do you think they get their sense of identity from?
Yeah, well, in regards to the progress you mentioned there, when they came on the estate, they would have moved from what we call a Watland dab house, made of bricks and mud, and they bought lands, so they used their money wisely, and they had to survive that situation. Then they moved on to boat houses in the 1930s, 1920s. Later on, they would have built concrete houses. So you see, there was this movement upwards all of the time. So they had that really resilience and the survival mode, and they educated themselves. They were very ambitious, and they moved up now to being doctors and professors, and in different parts of the world. And they didn't only stay in St. Vincent, they moved on to different countries, where they had opportunities to flourish, and to be educated. So yes, going back to your question, can you please state your question? I guess I went off on a tangent there.
No, that was, you touched on some good points. This upward movement, this being in survival mode, doing what you have to do to survive and to persevere, and how that is a part of from what I see, a part of the identity, and of the Indo-Caribbean person. And maybe that's why it was sort of a contrast that came up for you when you were in England, seeing the generation of my generation who was a little bit more lax about the education.
Yeah, so your question about identity, yes. Yeah, so all of those struggles over the years would have built a unique identity for the Indians in St. Vincent. And the Indians in St. Vincent are different than the Indians in Trinidad. The Indians who came through the indentured system are different than the Indians who just came over to St. Vincent in the last 50 years as doctors and professors and so on. Our Indian family are Indians who went through that struggle of 160 years and experienced all these problems and survived through those years and built an identity. Our identity is different than the Indians in Trinidad. We have joined together with the other races also in a different way than in Trinidad and Guyana. There has been some racism, yes, but it's more it's not as bad as those other countries. You know, we have amalgamated into one society. We are more creolized than
Yes.
in Trinidad and in Guyana.
With
You know, so we have our unique identity. So everything makes up your identity, you know, your family, where you live, the people impacted in you. So that's why the Indians from Grenada are a bit different than okay, let's do the example of the accent. You know, that's a good marker as an identity point, because the accent is influenced from all those different factors. And you have a unique accent in St. Vincent, you have a unique accent in Grenada, and St. Lucia. The French would have influenced them more than in St. Vincent, you know. So it's the same thing in regards to our own identity. It's influenced by everything that we experience, and our family, our parents, and those around us experience. You know, so it could determine even St. Vincent. This thing about being ambitious. I'll give you an example. I was working at the National Development Foundation, and I used to go out into the fields and look at different projects. And we had some farming projects where people would get some money and as to assist them in the farm, we would provide technical assistance to them. And I noted something peculiar, that the people in Overland, up on the windward side of the island, they were a bit different than the people in Mexico and Richland Park. They didn't have that survival mode as much. They wanted to be spoon-fed a bit more, in a sense, than those in Richland Park. Richland Park, people in America were more fighters, and they would survive it. Whatever little they had, they would try to make it work and to be productive. And I think that could have been because they were on the estate for a longer period of time, and they were more dependent on massa, as you said, than those who left the Richland Park. Africans came from the Maroons who ran away from the estate, and they had to survive on their own. They were in the villages around Richland Park, on the mountains around Richland Park, in Greggs and Richland Park. The Maroons were there. So that impacted the culture. So your life experience, what your family went through, impacts you, and the society impacts you from an identity.
Yeah, that's and that brings up another question, which I think you touched on, was what was the relationship like with the Indo-Caribbean people and the Afro-Caribbean people? I think you mentioned that it sounds like you mentioned that there was more unity amongst the people in St. Vincent, whereas maybe the situation was different in places like Guyana and Trinidad. Am I hearing that correctly?
In every group, there is some form of identity going to far, you know, and that could be racism, right? And loving yourself, because even in the Indian society, you have differences in terms of class and caste and all that. So you would find that everywhere you go, there would be racism. But it was, in St. Vincent, I don't think it's as pronounced as in Guyana and in Trinidad. Of course, the Indians are racist too. You know what I mean? But as a young boy growing up, I experienced racism from Africans. I could see the Indians' racism too, also, you know. So there's been that. But when the Indians just came to St. Vincent, they came in a bad time because, and not only Indians, I think the Portuguese also, because the Africans didn't want anyone to come. The Africans want to have bargaining power, you know. So if you don't have supply of labor and you need my labor, you have to raise up the price. But when they bring in the Indians, the aliens, the Indians and the Portuguese, you know, that carried on the price of labor. So they demand, you know, so they were upset at first, you know, with anyone who came in. Not necessarily that it was racist, but that was the situation, you know. It could have been another group of Africans. As a matter of fact, some Africans came in who were free Africans. and accepted. I'm not as sure, but I would have thought that they probably accepted the low wages also.
Yeah.
So of course you had that, and over the years you have had that. But I think similar to the example about religion and Hinduism, it's similar to race. You interact more with different races in St. Vincent, and you learn more about each other, and you reconcile differences easier. So I think that's one of the things that contributed to the better relations in regards to race in St. Vincent and in Guyana and Trinidad.
Yeah. And, one of the other things, talking about the influence of our ancestral history and things of this nature, what comes to mind is I wonder how much that does affect. I know it affects our sense of identity. It contributes to that. But also, I wonder if we know how it affects us on a physical level, because there was some traumas that happened. It's a very traumatic experience, coming from India to the Caribbean, really striving, doing your best, being resilient, while you're focused on a survival mode, but there's still these traumas, the anguish of maybe you had to leave family behind, maybe you've lost loved ones from sickness, you were looked down upon from the British people, and pressure to do certain things. So all of that seems to build up in the system, and I wonder if that has manifested in health issues for the Indo-Caribbean people. I wonder if these sort of emotional traumas have been passed down, and that perhaps they weren't fully dealt with because we're focused on surviving, we're focused on getting things done, working, while that trauma, scientists nowadays say that trauma is passed down from generation to generation. So I just wonder, I'm just curious about how that may be affecting us on a health level. I wonder if it contributes to, alcoholism, substance abuse, and things like that. Has that have you noticed anything about it? Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, I don't, as I mentioned before, I think the trauma is dealt with mainly in the first generation. So your mom going to America, the trauma of moving, if we use that word trauma, it's not a negative connotation, but it's a trauma for anybody leaving St. Vincent and moving to another country. It's also like a trauma. You're getting adjusted to the new society. So, but it's usually first generation would have felt that from India. So by after the generation, there were about, according to Asian phrases, speech I mentioned before, of the 376 Indians who remained in St. Vincent in 1911, only about 113 were original Indians from India. The other 200 and some were born in St. Vincent. Those 200 would not have been traumatized. They were born in St. Vincent. As Paul Skin Douglas say, I live here, but a boy here. So they would have seen St. Vincent as their home, and successive generations over time would see St. Vincent as their home. So that trauma would have disappeared. There might be remnants of it, right? Physically, right? We are physically Indians, and so in regards to health and so on, whatever problems or advantages, those would have been passed down also physically through your DNA and things like that. In regards to mixing, there was some assimilation, but not as much as, I think not as much as in some other islands. Well, I think St. Lucia, there was a lot of assimilation into different races in St. Lucia. So there were mixed marriages a lot more. The Indians in Census, or they would not um, they didn't what I was going to say not as in Trinidad, right? They still kept their identity physically, even though they were not Hindus. They became Christians. They still married to Indians, right? So you have a lot of intermarriages, and the Indians, for example, the estates on the windward side, they used to go, I understand, to Argyle to get a wife because they always stay. There was a interview we had recently with Mr. Solin, Noel Solin from Rosebank. He said the men from Argyle used to go down to Richmond and Rosebank to get the girls because they were pretty girls down there. And these are Indians, so they were looking for Indian partners. So the lineage of the Indians continued down the generations, Indian marrying Indians, you know. But I think in later years, in the 60s, 70s, you would have had some intermarriage with different races, and more now, you know. Currently, you have someone estimate that the population of St. Vincent, well, about 15%, 15 of the 23% who are mixed may have Indian heritage, physically, Indian genes. So, but in St. Vincent now, there's only 1.1% of the population who are pure Indians, who consider themselves to be pure Indians. I mean, some 20, 30 years ago, we used to say 6% and 5% of Vincentians are Indians, but I think the last census in 2012, I saw the CIA reported that 1.1, so that's only about 1,200 physically purebred Indians we have in St. Vincent now. There. So it's similar to the end of the last century, where you had only about 300 Indians. We only have 1,200 now, whereas 20, 30 years ago, we have had 5,000, 6,000 Indians in St. Vincent. But so they have mixed. Yeah. And I find that those who have migrated also have mixed even more into different races. I guess you also mix as you move across.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's and going back to that sense of, I've talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs on the pyramid. The probably halfway up the pyramid is the need for belonging. And when going back to how these traumas might have influenced, certain generations. So, my mom came from St. Vincent to New York, and obviously it was probably a trauma and a shock of sorts to be in this new land coming from St. Vincent. Yeah. Good traumas. Or, just feeling like this sense of not belonging and maybe having this desire to kind of adjust and assimilate to this new place. But I think it might be doubly so because if you're coming from St. Vincent, in St. Vincent, depending on how solid that identity was, I think is dependent on the total package, the total history, which I do think in some way it's passed down, from generation to generation. So now you may be in a place in St. Vincent where, not on a conscious level, but there may be some feeling of not belonging to begin with, and then coming to the United States, and like now there's a double feeling of not belonging.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's correct, and it depend. It could depend on the person, because those who came from India, I mean, half of them went back. Some of them decided to stay. So people move for economic reasons primarily, you know. People move from St. Vincent to North America, to England, of course, and more to New York and Toronto, because they want to improve the economic situation. And they sent for the children and the cousins and so on, and moved up to those places. You know, so it's a life decision. So it wouldn't be traumatic in that sense. You know, because they would have built a community up there. So they would have felt your mom felt belong. She have a sense of belonging in America, and then all the family came up. So you have a community there to depend on. You know. And then you have to compare as I said, the economic situation in St. Vincent and the educational opportunities, where people went abroad because they could have provided better for the children education. You know, in St. Vincent in the 1980s, 1970s, the highest level you could have got, I mean, generally, is a teacher's level, except you get a scholarship. And to go to a university abroad. And so...
Yeah, you bring up
providing better opportunities for the children.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't think the call it the trauma of moving, it's not all that impactful or strong. It's more positive than negative. So moving is more positive. People, I think the Indian people, St. Vincent, they move because of better opportunities and for better economic situation. Even now, some of them have the opportunity to retire back in St. Vincent, and they're not doing that. And they in terms of economic situation, they retire in Florida because the amenities are there. You know, you have a lot of advantages living in Florida rather than back in St. Vincent, even though you have very nice weather in St. Vincent. You know, so you make the choice according to the situation of the place.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It is, you know, what I call trauma. You know, might not be like a very strong trauma, and what I'm focusing on is more of, you know, what I imagine to be our ancestors that were taken from India and brought to St. Vincent and treated in harshly in many cases. I don't think that is, you know, from what I believe is that's passed down in some way. I mean, we pass down things from the, you know, the mother to the child when she's pregnant on an energetic level, on a, you know, there's a memory in the body.
In regards to slavery also, it's the same thing. So the slaves were taken from Africa and brought to St. Vincent. But in the case of the Indians, yes, some of them were kidnapped, I understand. I have some stories about that. The Indians primarily made their own minds. They decided to come to St. Vincent, so they were not taken per se from India and brought to St. Vincent. The economic situation, but you could say that the British made it that way. They starved a lot of people, they mismanaged the economy, and the economy was very bad in India, so people wanted to get a better life. And, you know, if you're sinking, you hold on to a straw, right? So if there's a better opportunity in the Caribbean, in the territory, in Mauritius, about 500,000 went to Mauritius. They 500,000 or more than that there. So it's not so much of a trauma in that sense. It is a trauma, yes, but it's something that they accepted or they approved of.
Yeah, it sounds like they were trying to get out of maybe a situation that was worse in
Right,
India. So
right,
that could be the source of it, rather than the journey, the trip here to St. Vincent, to the Caribbean, was the solution. It sounds like for many people, the solution to the problem. Excuse me. Although they were deceived and things of this
yeah.
nature as well. But let's there was something else. Now I'm losing my train of thought. But you brought up um, something, and I'm drawing a blank. I'm drawing a blank. But yeah, this is just the positive part. Okay, the positive part of the making the best out of a situation. So coming to the United States and finding a way here, and how that kind of becomes a part of our identity.
Right. So
And
this is a story of the Indian from St. Vincent. I think maybe in the future, maybe another 50 years, we would hardly have an Indian in St. Vincent. I mean, so it would be a transit story, as I said some time ago. We have to put that as a part of a history that we passed through the Caribbean. So it would identify us as different than the Indians who came to America directly from India. The Indians,
yeah.
your generation of Indian in America would have passed through St. Vincent. Your history would have been different than those who came directly from India.
Yeah. So we're coming up on an hour and a half, so I think it's about time to begin wrapping up. What I'd like to say is, I started this search because of my own curiosity to become more aware of who I am, a little bit more of my history, because I think it's important to be aware of all aspects of the things that make us the way that we are, that contribute to the filter in which we perceive the world. Because if we just know the surface level stuff of where I am right now, and we don't know all the influences, then there's blind spots, and then there's more chances to, react and not know why we're not conscious of, we're ignorant of certain things. So that's why I think the work that you do is so important. And even in this conversation, I've come away with a different perspective than I had before. And it's more of a sense of empowerment of, of the Indo-Caribbean people that chose to get out of a situation that was difficult, and that chose to make a life that that's their own, and create this sort of unique culture that we see in the Indo-Caribbean people. So it's something to celebrate, to appreciate, and this uniqueness, this complexity, this nuanced way of being that we have built. And so, like, me taking that on now is it helps, because I've always had this sort of sense of who am I, kind of. I'm like mixed on both. My mom's from St. Vincent, so I have that side, and then my dad is African American, so I had that side. So I was always a little bit, confused as to the whole picture of who I am, and where my roots are. So I appreciate you being here with us. And is there anything that we didn't discuss that you wanted to talk about, or any words that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Well, yeah, I would just like to say that I agree with you that it's always good to be aware of our history. And of course, it affects us. If you're aware of who we are, where we came from, it can drive us to make better decisions for the future. I'd just like to say in closing that today is Mother's Day in England. I want to wish all the mothers happy Mother's Day. Those Indians who are celebrating Pagwa or Holi, I want to, and this is a festival of colors. I want to wish them a happy Holi. And also, today coincidentally is the March 14th. It's National Heroes Day in St. Vincent. Yes, today was the day when Chatoya, our national hero, was killed. So we decided to celebrate this day as National Heroes Day. So happy National Heroes Day to all of you in St. Vincent and Vincentians in the diaspora. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy National Heroes Day. And see, I'm learning something new. What was the name of the hero?
Joseph Chatoya.
And what did he?
Chatoyer.
Okay.
Yeah, he was one of the Garifuna, the Africans and the Caribs that mixed race. He was one who led the revolt against the British. He decided sometimes with the French, and he was a very strategic leader in regards to warfare. They knew the territory of St. Vincent very well. They used to live in the mountains and so on.
Yeah.
In the 17, I think somewhere in the late 18th century, 1797 or 77, somewhere around that time.
Yeah.
I remember the dates, yeah. There was a second revolt of the Caribs. They had one before, I think, that was with the French on their side. And then they revolted again. After that, they were taken, the British subdued them, and 4,000 plus Garifunas were taken to Russian Island off the coast of Belize. And we have the birth of the Garifuna people. They're now in Honduras, in California, in Central America, and thousands of them, maybe someone estimated, I think, about 8.8 million maybe existing around. I'm not too sure. We have mixed.
Yeah.
We have a unique history in St. Vincent.
Wow. Yeah, it's really fascinating. Really, really fascinating. The story of St. Vincent is going to make a good movie one day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can work on something later on.
Yeah. All right, so I'm just going to do some closing remarks. Again, you've been this is the Guided Meditations and More podcast. I'm your host, Ade Richardson. We're here with Mr. Lenroy Thomas, and we're talking about the East Indian diaspora in the West Indies, and it's been a really interesting conversation, and where I came away with a lot of it. I hope you did too. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below this video. You can also send me a direct message. If you have any, can people contact you for questions? Yes. And yeah, how could they contact you?
In regards to the, you can probably use the St. Vincent Indian Heritage Foundation Facebook page and write your questions there. It's more convenient there because rather than sending an email, I'm moderating that Facebook page, so you can ask me questions there.
Great, and I'll
Indian Heritage Foundation Facebook group.
Okay, and I'll put a link to that in the description of this video on Facebook. And there's a lot of great stuff. Lenroy has done a lot of research, as well as some other people. Would you like to name who else has been doing the research on this?
So Vincent, well, primarily the foremost researcher of Indian history in St. Vincent is Dr. Lenroy Thomas.
Okay.
He's from Calder. And Dr. Rudy Bailey.
Okay.
Dr. Rudy Bailey has done tremendous research in regards to history.
Okay, yeah. So I encourage you all to check out the Facebook page. There's some good information there. Lenroy has made it easy for people like me, because he did the work, and I'm able to connect some of these dots and get some answers, to way more answers than I thought that there were, for some of the questions I had. So I appreciate that. So thank you for joining. And if you like these podcasts, if you like or follow the page, you'll get updates and notifications for the upcoming podcast. I also offer guided meditations on this page as well. I haven't been doing many lately, but if you look through the video section of the page, you'll find guided meditations. I'm going to start doing the live ones again at some point. So thank you all for joining, and everyone be well.